Welcome to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by trackpads.com. Each week, we take one pivotal moment from United States military history and follow it from the first warning signs to the final outcome. Today, we go to the Central Highlands of Vietnam in the Vietnam War for the story of the Battle of Drang. The first thing many air cavalry troopers noticed was the noise. Huey rotor blades hammered the humid air over the Drang Valley in November 1965, bouncing off the low ridgelines and filling the clearing below with a steady roar. Beneath them, Landing Zone X-ray sat in the elephant grass like a target on the valley floor, ringed by scrub trees and overlooked by shadowed hills. In the open doors, soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division leaned out with rifles and machine guns, watching a tree line that looked empty but felt alive. When the first helicopters flared into the clearing, the valley exploded into motion. Red dust, grass, and leaves whipped through the air as men jumped from the skids and crouched low in the rotor wash. Troopers tried to form a rough security ring around anthills, broken stumps, and shallow depressions that would have to serve as cover. Officers shouted over the engines, while each helicopter lifted away to bring in another load of soldiers. This was air mobility made real. A battalion delivered in minutes where an older army might have needed days to march. Beyond the clearing, another army was already moving. North Vietnamese regulars shifted through the trees, dry creek beds, and trails around the valley. They were trained, organized, and ready for this kind of fight. They understood that an air cavalry battalion arrived in waves, one company at a time. If they could close on the landing zone before the full American force assembled, they might crush the battalion in the clearing. That was the trap forming around X-ray. At first, the signs were small. Movement behind trees, the shine of a weapon barrel, a flicker in the grass. Then rifle and machine gun fire snapped across the landing zone, cutting through shouted orders and rotor noise. Men fell where they had been standing seconds earlier. What began as an insertion of a new kind of force became a close-range fight for survival. The troopers quickly realized this was not a small guerrilla force firing a few shots before slipping away. The volume and accuracy of fire revealed an organized enemy determined to destroy them. Every tree line seemed to hold a squad. Every fold in the ground could hide a firing position. The idea of a clean, textbook air assault vanished almost immediately. The valley had become a killing ground. The battle erupted at a moment when Washington had only recently committed large ground formations to Vietnam. The 1st Cavalry Division, officially designated airmobile, was supposed to represent a new way of fighting. Helicopters would move troops across difficult terrain, find an elusive enemy, and bring firepower to bear before that enemy could disappear. If the concept worked in the Central Highlands, it could become a model for the war. For leaders in Hanoi, the stakes were just as high. North Vietnamese planners had sent regular regiments down the Ho Chi Minh Trail into the border region near Cambodia. Their goal was battalions could be bled white and measure how far the United States was willing to go. Drang was not a random meeting engagement. It was a test for both sides. For the men at X-ray, those strategic questions became immediate and personal. If the battalion was overrun, the cost would be counted in hundreds of dead or captured soldiers and a wave of doubt back home. Even if the battalion held, the fight would show that major battles in Vietnam might require high casualties, massive artillery, and airstrikes called in dangerously close to friendly lines. The road to Landing Zone X-ray began weeks earlier at Play Me, a besieged Special Forces camp in the Central Highlands. North Vietnamese regulars surrounded the outpost in October 1965, testing South Vietnamese defenders and the newly arrived American force. When the siege was broken, American commanders knew enemy regiments were still in the hills, moving back toward the Cambodian border. The question was whether to let them disappear or chase them into difficult country. The 1st Cavalry Division was built for that chase. Infantry battalions were paired with helicopter companies, so commanders could leap over bad roads and thick jungle, land near the enemy, and bring artillery and air power to bear. Tracking the regiments that had attacked Plei Mi led American attention to the Ia Drang Valley and the Chu Pong Massif. The maps were thin, the terrain favored those who knew it, and the enemy was waiting. On the other side, North Vietnamese commanders had prepared the ground. They placed regiments in the slopes, trails, and folds around Chu Pong, using bunkers, spider holes, and covered approaches to create a maze. They had studied American helicopter tactics and knew that the Americans would land in waves. If they could hit fast enough, they might destroy 1 or 2 battalions before American firepower could fully arrive. Into that danger came Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore and 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry. Their orders were to find the enemy, fix him in place, and use artillery and airstrikes to destroy him. Landing Zone X-Ray was a modest clearing near the base of Chu Pong, barely large enough for a few helicopters at a time. It was close enough to force contact and open enough to form a perimeter. In effect, it was a bet that air cavalry could land, build combat power, and hold faster than the enemy could react. As Moore's companies began spreading out from X-Ray, the valley immediately felt too tight. One platoon pushing toward the trees ran into heavy fire and became effectively cut off. Rescue efforts turned into firefights of their own, pulling men and attention away from the work of securing the landing zone. The fight to reach and support that isolated platoon became one of the first urgent crises of the battle. Meanwhile, the helicopters kept coming. Each aircraft dropped more troopers into a clearing already under fire, then lifted away with wounded men or returned for another load. New arrivals stepped into dust, noise, confusion, and immediate danger. Officers and non-commissioned officers pushed them toward shallow cover around anthills, stumps, and small rises. The landing zone was both lifeline and bullseye. It brought in men and ammunition, but it also drew enemy fire. North Vietnamese commanders fed more troops into the fight. They probed for weak points, attacked from multiple directions, and used the brush and trees to get close before launching sudden assaults. For the Americans in their foxholes, the battle became a cycle of incoming fire, shouted commands, and return fire at shapes appearing through grass and smoke. At times, the distance between the two sides shrunk to only a few feet. Supporting fires became the difference between survival and destruction. Artillery batteries miles away fired continuously on targets called in by forward observers lying close to the impact zones. Those observers had to keep the shells close enough to break up attacks without dropping them on friendly positions. Overhead, aircraft delivered bombs, rockets, and napalm, guided by controllers threading their attacks between the American perimeter and the advancing North Vietnamese. At one desperate point, a broken arrow call went out, signaling that an American unit was in danger of being overrun and drawing available aircraft toward the valley. As the first day faded, both sides prepared for an even harder night. American leaders tightened foxholes, shifted ammunition, assigned final protective fires, and made sure soldiers knew where friendly positions were in the dark. North Vietnamese units used the same fading light to move troops closer, select assault points, and test the perimeter. Everyone understood that the night would be worse. The night battle around X-Ray answered how much punishment an air cavalry battalion could endure. The answer came in inches of ground, whispered commands, and artillery called almost on top of friendly foxholes. North Vietnamese assaults came again and again, sometimes so close that Americans could hear voices and gear moving in the grass. Officers and sergeants shifted men to threatened points, tightened sectors of fire, and called in artillery at terrifyingly short distances. If the shells landed too far out, the line might break. If they landed too close, American positions could be shredded. In those conditions, the air cavalry concept was stripped to its essentials. Helicopters could not freely operate in the dark. The landing zone was no longer a highway in the sky, but a small contested patch of earth. What still worked were radios, artillery, discipline, and the refusal of companies to pull back. Lieutenant Colonel Moore and his leaders moved along the line under fire, reshaping the perimeter and preventing gaps from opening. Medics crawled to wounded men and dragged them towards shallow casualty collection points. By dawn, the battalion at X-Ray was battered, thinned, and exhausted, but it was still there. Reinforcements from sister battalions arrived, thickening the perimeter and allowing some of Moore's men to shift or pull back slightly without exposing the line. At the same time, heavier American firepower began striking the broader Chupong area. Airstrikes and long-range bombers hit suspected headquarters, supply areas, and fallback routes. The North Vietnamese had not destroyed the battalion in place. The turning point at X-Ray was not a sweeping maneuver or one heroic charge. It came when North Vietnamese leaders could no longer see a path to destroying the battalion before reinforcements and firepower tipped the balance. It also came when American commanders realized that a helicopter-borne battalion could land deep in hostile territory, be surrounded, and still survive if leadership, artillery, air power, and discipline held together. The answer was narrow, costly, and incomplete, but it was still an answer. The campaign did not end when companies began leaving X-Ray. As elements of the 7th Cavalry moved toward another landing zone, Albany, they walked into a devastating ambush. Strung out along trails through jungle and elephant grass, American formations were hit before they could form proper defensive positions. Companies were cut apart at close range, radio networks struggled, and confusion spread quickly. Where X-Ray had shown how a strong perimeter and firepower could save a battalion, Albany showed how quickly an air-mobile force could be ripped open when caught on the move. By the time the fighting in the valley ebbed, both sides had paid heavily. American leaders counted Drang as a tactical success, pointing to North Vietnamese losses and the fact that the Central Highlands did not fall. North Vietnamese commanders drew different lessons. They saw that by closing to very short range, they could reduce the effect of American artillery and air power. They also proved that disciplined units, fighting from close cover and accepting heavy losses, could inflict serious damage on air-mobile battalions. Inside American headquarters, the lessons were mixed. The air cavalry concept had shown that it could move fast, hit hard, and survive contact with major enemy forces in difficult terrain. But the casualty lists raised hard questions about how many such battles the United States could sustain, and whether search and destroy operations in remote valleys truly shifted the larger balance of the war. Drang suggested that mobility and firepower could win battles, but not necessarily solve the war. Over time, Drang became an early blueprint for the contradictions of Vietnam. The battle showcased modern helicopters, radios, artillery, and airstrikes. It also revealed the enduring power of terrain, close combat, enemy adaptation, and small unit endurance. Technology could put soldiers almost anywhere on the map. It could not guarantee what happened after they landed, and the enemy closed inside the safe range of supporting fires. For modern students of war, the clearings and anthills of the Ia Trang Valley remain a sharp lesson. The campaign raises questions about when to pursue, how to use air mobility, how to protect isolated units, and how to fight an enemy willing to absorb losses for political and strategic goals. The lessons are not simple. They are hard, costly, and still relevant. This has been the story of the Battle of Ia Drang and the air cavalry's trial by fire in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. Headline Wednesday is developed by trackpads.com as part of Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine.